London can be a nightmare if you don't know how to get about. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about how to travel around London. Of course, along the way, we're going to be learning at least 10 pieces of vocabulary related to transport in London. Of course, joining me on the English Right Now podcast is my dear friend Rob. Hello.
Hello, Roy. That was a bit understated. Hello, Roy. Hello, everybody. How are we?
Hello. Welcome. I was just kind of allowing you to kind of get excited there. So yeah, hello Rob. It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, you too. You too. And I'm very excited. We're going to visit London today, yeah?
We are. We're going to talk all about London. Of course, we're going to meet up in London soon. Maybe we can do a live version in London. But we're going to talk about traveling around London. Now, I moved to London when I was sort of an adult, and it was quite tricky at first to understand how things worked. So you've lived in London obviously a lot longer than I have. Still live quite close to London. What do you think is the first thing that people should be aware of when they are traveling in London?
I think the first thing is not. It's got a great transport system, but actually a lot of places are quite close together. So you don't actually need to use transport to get from one site to another. But when you do, I think London has an amazing transport system. I've been to many cities around the world, and I think London has one of the best and most developed. Everywhere is covered by one form of transport or another, I think.
Yeah, this is absolutely. It's really intriguing because you can walk. Sometimes it's quicker to walk from one area to another. I remember discovering that actually Leicester Square to Covent Garden is quite a nice walk, and it's
Mm,
really close. And actually, it
yeah.
probably takes about the same amount of time. Maybe not. Maybe slightly quicker on the tube. But there you go. But first of all, we're going to talk about the tube, and I think the tube is it's famous. I believe it's the oldest underground railway in the world. It is an underground railway. We use that word, the underground, but we quite commonly refer to it as the tube. And notice that pronunciation of tube. It's not tube or tube, it's tube. It's got that ch sound, the tube. What are your feelings? Do you love the tube? How do you feel about the tube?
I love the tube. I think it's amazing. Obviously, it's called the tube because of the shape of the tunnel, isn't it? And so
Yeah.
it's like a tube, and therefore the train that goes through it gets called or nicknamed the tube. Yeah, as I said before, it's got a really complex system going to all kinds of parts of London. It's fun to ride on, and it's not all underground, is it? As you get to the sort of edges of London, it suddenly pops up above ground, and then you get a view, don't you?
Yeah, I remember I used to live in West London in a place called Northfields, which is not far from Ealing, and there's a part where the train is it's underground at Earl's Court, and then at Barron's Court it emerges into the daylight.
Mm.
And it's like, oh my goodness, it's still day. It's really weird because it is dark underground. Of course, it is.
Yeah, yeah.
But the first thing I would say that we need to remember is when you're coming to London, it's quite easy. The simplest way to get about is to buy a Oyster card, and an Oyster card is basically a travel card. And this is something that you use you use it in everywhere to get onto the tube, to get off the tube. It's really important. I love the fact that they call it an Oyster card
Mm.
because, of course, why did they call it an Oyster card?
Is it from Shakespeare?
I think it
The
is.
world is your oyster.
The world is your oyster. I
Oh,
believe so. That's what I always imagined it is. It's probably not. It's probably somebody was like, coming up with an idea at the time they were used to eating oysters or something. But no, I think it comes from the world is your oyster. In other words, it opens up the world to you. That's what I think it's from. Have you got an Oyster card or do you use another form of payment?
yeah, I've got two forms. I've got the Oyster card because that was the thing to have a few years ago, a sort of prepay
Yeah.
card that you just tap on the barriers as you go through. But now it's easier, actually. You can use your bank card and go what they call contactless. And I know you do actually make contact with the barrier, usually with your bank
Yeah.
card, but you don't have to actually. If you just hover above the pad on the barrier, it lets you through. So, yeah, you don't have to even buy an Oyster card. You just use your bank card. You
Yeah.
tap in, which means you touch as you go in, and you tap
Yeah.
out when you get to your destination. And then
Yes.
somehow, amazingly, it works out the cheapest fare and takes the money out of your bank account.
Lots of really, really good vocabulary used there. So, first of all, this is a prepay card. The Oyster card is a prepay card. You can buy a kind of a weekly ticket on there as well, which just means you pay one off, and everything is well, it's not free, but everything is already paid for. And some people pay as they go. which basically means they put money onto the card. Now, if we want to put money onto the card, we say we top up the card. Great phrasal verb, to top up my Oyster card. Where can I top up my Oyster card? There's machines on the wall. You tap your Oyster card on the wall, and then you add money to it. You say top up my Oyster. And then, as you say, you go to the barriers. There are usually barriers, and you have to tap in, and the barrier opens, and then you tap out at the end of the journey. Always remember to tap in and tap out. Otherwise, these wonderful technology doesn't know when to stop charging you. So you have to tap in, tap out. And of course, if you don't tap in, and somebody sort of checks your Oyster, an official checks your Oyster, then you could get into trouble. You could get a fine, which is like a penalty payment. So top up, tap in, tap out, and yeah, as you say, contactless makes no sense to me whatsoever because I always I make contact with my card. But yeah, and you said also
it's not necessary. It's not necessary, Roy. Okay,
No.
you don't actually have to physically touch the pad, but I think people do. It's quite satisfying to actually touch it, and then it makes a bleep noise, and you know you've made your transaction.
I am such I'm almost a Luddite. A Luddite was a kind of person that was scared of technology. The Industrial Revolution, it was a group of people that were anti-technology. I'm almost a Luddite because I've only just started paying with my phone. Like only just. It's something I've been avoiding for so long, and now I do it. You also mentioned the word fair.
That's a good point, Roy. I was just say that's a good point, Roy. Though you can also pay with your phone if you've got Apple Pay or something like similar systems on your phone. You can also use that. But being a Luddite, don't be a complete Luddite and don't pay in cash for your tickets because that is the most expensive way to travel around. Don't use cash.
Absolutely. So this is something as well. You said the word fare. Fare is basically the price you have to pay to travel. How much is the fare? What's the fare? So this is another word. It's a slightly formal word. We'd say probably what's the price. But we do need to talk about fare zones in a minute. That's what I'd say. So you've tapped in, you've gone through the barriers, you've got to the platform. What's one of the wonderful things that you hear? It's a famous 3 words, isn't it? Can you remember that?
Not at every station, but some stations. No. It's a recorded message that keeps saying, "Mind the gap, mind the gap."
Mind the gap. It's so iconic. Those 3 words. Those 3 words. They are so iconic. They are just, when you think of London, I think of mind the gap. I think of, if I get on a train, I think see it, say it, sorted, and those kind of things. But mind the gap is a really interesting phrase because mind is quite a formal word to mean be aware of or be careful of, be aware of, but with this kind of sense of warning. It can be quite formal. Mind the space. The gap is a space. We have gaps in our teeth. We have a space between the train and the platform. So it's sort of saying, be aware, be careful of the gap because you could fall down it. I could also say, mind the doors. When the doors are closing, be aware of, be careful of the doors. And if you're rude, I could say quite formally, mind your manners. Be aware of your manners.
Or mind your P's and Q's.
Oh, lovely. My P's and Q's relate to please and thank yous. Something that's very important in British culture, if we're totally honest. Being polite. So you get on the tube. What are a few things you need to be aware of? You get on the carriage. So carriage is the kind of place where people go, commuters go. They sit and they can stand. The standing room in there. What are a few things that you need to be aware of when you get on the carriage?
Okay, so obviously the doors slide open, you get on, and often if you're traveling in central London, it's really busy. So you have to squeeze on. So you usually have to say, "Excuse me, can I get on? Please, could you move down the carriage?" That sort of thing. So it might be a little bit of a squash and a squeeze when you get on the carriage. But the other thing, of course, once you're on the carriage, don't make eye contact. Don't make conversation with people. That's not a very British thing to do. just squeezing into your space and hold on to the what do you call them at the top there? The rail.
The handle at the top.
The handle.
And the handrail would probably be the best way for it. And I mean, this is something that you absolutely. Gosh, we do need to mention this. I would say if you go to more sort of suburban places, probably actually more rural places like where I live, We don't have a tube. We don't have an underground, of course not. We barely have a rail system down here. There is a railway, a train line on one part of the island. Getting on a bus, even then, it's not normal to talk to people. But sometimes on the bus, people will have a chat, particularly older people. They may want to chat. But on the tube, it is the most antisocial environment I've ever seen. Everybody's either looking at the phone, looking at a book, looking down. Don't stare at people. Um, don't look at people. Really, it's a bit sad, I think.
Mm.
But yeah, the tube itself is very kind of stay to yourself. And I often talk about there's almost a denial culture in British culture traveling on transport that we just deny that anything exists. We don't look around. We don't like to be disturbed. We don't like to,
Yeah, yeah.
if there's a
But
commotion.
yeah, we don't react. I mean, of course, a lot of people these days now have headphones or earphones in, so everyone's kind of locked into their own bit of music or whatever they're listening to. So therefore, there's no interaction. Even if you're squashed next to somebody, you don't talk to them. But and the other thing worth mentioning down on the tube, it's underground, particularly in the summer, it gets really hot, and the transport organisation recommend you take a bottle of water with you, because if the train was to break down in the tunnel and you're stuck in a very hot train in a hot tunnel, you need some water. So they do advise
Yeah,
take bottles of water with you.
yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I remember sometimes it's just it can get really insanely hot, surprisingly hot down there.
Mm.
Another thing as well, we need to talk about there are specific seats that are sort of designated for pregnant people, elderly, this sort of thing. And if you are sat, you can sit in one of those seats. But if they're like priority seats, you should
Yeah,
give up your seat. Give up your seat basically means to give it to that other person, to give up your seat, volunteer that seat
yeah. To
to
offer
the
your
person.
seat, offer your seat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's and people will say, I think it's if you don't, it's really kind of a negative reception from people. They find it quite
Mm.
rude. I would find it quite rude. And you said as
Yeah.
well that good words for when you squeeze on. The tube carriage could be packed or rammed. Those are two adjectives two adjectives we use to sort of describe very full.
Mm. And
Yeah,
it's probably worth mentioning the rush hour, because this is when the trains are especially full. Rush hour, or in terms of ticket prices, there's a peak time, isn't there? Where sometimes
yeah,
it depends on what ticket you're buying, but it can be more expensive to travel in the peak time, the busiest time.
yeah. And the alternative to peak, which is the busiest time or the time that most people want to travel, is off peak, which is
Mm.
usually a little bit cheaper. We've talked a lot about the tube, but it is a major part of traveling around London.
Oh,
Um,
and
sometimes,
can I
yeah.
before you go on, Roy, I just wanted a special mention to our newest tube line in London, the
Oh,
Elizabeth line, which only opened a year or two ago. It's not really a tube, actually. It's more of an underground railway. It goes from the suburbs, east and west, and it comes in through London. And it's a quicker way of traveling across London, because there are a lot of stations on the tube, but
yeah.
this train doesn't stop as often. New trains, bigger inside, they're air conditioned. It's a really good line to travel on. So I'm a bit of a railway geek, and I like
I
my
love
trains.
trains.
But the
Which
Elizabeth line is pretty amazing. Yeah, the Elizabeth
I
line, named after our late Queen.
Yeah, I absolutely adore trains. But as well, another thing about the price, there are London is divided is split into zones. There are sort of six main zones. I think it goes up to seven, eight, nine up in the northwest. But if you travel within zone one, it's a certain price. So a zone is like an area, but they're split into fare zones. So if you travel only from zone one to zone one, the fare will be a certain price. If you travel from zone one to zone two, it'll be a different price. So these zones, you need to think about which zone you're traveling to. Greenwich, for example, is on the border. Some stations are on the border of zone two and zone three. So you're
Yeah,
traveling from
yeah.
one to two, and
And if
so on,
if
so
you
on.
arrive at Heathrow Airport, for example, that's out in zone 6. Therefore,
Yeah,
your ticket into central London will cost more than going from zone 3. But another word for you is capping. Capping.
yeah,
You familiar with capping? Yeah.
I
So
am.
using your Oyster card or your contactless card, you pay for each journey, but there's a cap, so a limit to how much you will pay in total across a day.
Yeah. I always dread that reaching that price though, because it means I've done a lot. But yeah, so this travel, and I lived in zone. I've lived in zone 3. I've lived in zone 2. I lived in zone 1 for a little while.
Wow, got
But yeah,
around.
I know. There you go. I don't like to brag. But yeah, so that's the main way. I would say the tube is the main way. There are occasionally tube strikes. A strike is basically a form of workers' action where they stop working for a time period, maybe a day, maybe 2 days or 3 days, while they're sort of looking for a change of conditions to either their
Mm.
pay or their working conditions overall. There are tube strikes, and they do happen. And when that happens, London, it becomes quite chaotic.
It does, but we have an alternative, don't we? Of course, we have the buses to use. The
Yes.
famous London Red buses, which are
The,
fun to travel on, but I find them very slow, a really slow way to get around London. Cheaper than the
yeah.
tube, cheaper than using the trains, but and a great way of seeing the sights. If you're a tourist, it's a great way of seeing London on the cheap, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we have these double-decker buses, yeah?
Yes. So double decker, good word for that, is 2 floors. This was a good piece of vocabulary. 2 floors. It's where it has you have single decker buses, which is a 1 floor, and then if there's like 2, which is there's a model behind me, ironically enough. You can't see it here,
Oh,
but a model of the bus.
I've
Oh,
got a
there's
little
one
one
there.
over here.
Yeah,
There's one over
double
there.
decker bus. I can see it. So yeah, they're called double decker buses. And they are classic in London. And I'll be honest. When I first moved to London, I used to live in Crystal Palace, and there's no tube station in Crystal Palace. There's nothing even near. And I used to work in central London on Regent Street, and I would get a bus. I think it was the number 3. It was either the number 1 or the number 3 bus, and it used to take an hour door to door, but it was brilliant. And I would
Mm.
see all these wonderful sights, and then I would travel all around London every day. And it was actually quicker than maybe taking the tube and getting on a train and all that kind of stuff, and all these kind of changes. So
Mm.
I used to travel on the bus. Again, you tap on the bus, and then that's just basically a fixed price, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that, and I just realised that just at the moment. So you tap on the bus,
Bargain.
sit on the bus, get off the bus,
Yeah.
and that I think is a lovely way to travel around. It is a bit boring and a bit slow at times, particularly if you get stuck in a traffic jam. But
Mm.
there are designated bus lanes as well, which is an area
Yeah.
where only buses can drive. So
Yeah.
that does make it quicker, but they do stop a lot.
They do stop a lot,
No,
yeah. But I say if you are a tourist to London, you get on a double-decker bus, go upstairs, go on one of the popular routes through central London. You get to see all the sights, and you're sitting up
yeah.
high. Yeah, it's a good way. It's a good way of seeing the sights and resting your feet as well.
And in fact, we talked about this in our free guide to London, didn't we? We sort of
Yeah,
mentioned like 3 things to do in London or how to save money in London. These kind of tourist buses that are designed for tourism, sightseeing buses, can be really expensive, and you can just get on a specific routes uh, in London to kind of travel around and see all the same sights.
mm,
But
yeah,
again, a lot of it is in walking distance. I really kind of like walking around London. Of course, keep your phones in your pocket, keep safe, things like this. That's the general advice. But
mm,
I quite like walking, for example, from Waterloo to kind of Trafalgar Square. I really enjoy walking.
yeah.
Probably, ironically, we're going to talk about public transport in London, and we're both saying, "Oh, just walk, don't
Walk.
bother."
Yeah. No, but there are things to see a little bit further out, so you do need to use public transport.
Yeah,
And I think another great way of seeing the sights and moving around fairly quickly is actually on the river and using the ferries, or what they call the Thames Clippers, which are kind of
yeah,
high-speed catamaran boats that whiz up and down the river from west to east and through central London. They go down past Tower of London and under Tower Bridge, so you get some great views, but you move quite quickly. These are a bit more expensive than using the
yeah.
tube or the bus, but I think if you're a tourist to London, it's a good price for
I
seeing the
love that you
sights.
go under Tower Bridge as well. I think it's
Mm,
so amazing.
yeah,
And one thing I would say is all the transports we've talked about the tube, we've talked about buses, and we talked about now the boats, the ferries. You get on and you get off. Those are the words we use, to get on and
yeah,
get off. There's one final kind of form of transport that's quite popular, and that bikes,
yes. And
bikes, and
I'm a big fan of cycling anyway, so I really
Okay.
encourage you to use these bikes. They used to be called Boris bikes when they first were introduced, named after Boris Johnson, who was the mayor of London at the time. It
Yeah.
was his initial idea, so they were called Boris bikes. Now I think we call them Santander bikes because they're sponsored by the bank Santander. But basically, yeah, they're bikes that you can hire all around the
Yeah.
city. Again, fairly cheap. In fact, the new deal is you can pay £3.50 for unlimited use of a bike all day, but you can only,
Oh.
each journey has to be no longer than an hour. So after an hour, you need to check it back into like a docking station, click it in, and then click it out again for another journey. And you can do unlimited journeys all day for £3.50. So it's a great way to see London if it's not raining.
I'll be honest. That sounds really stressful. I can imagine me looking at my watch, going, "Oh my goodness, I've only got 5 minutes. I've got to check it in. Got to check it in." That would really, I don't know, that would really stress me out. I think I'd sooner just pay and leave it. But that's cool. There are these docking stations, as you say, and one other piece of vocabulary. I mean, we've done way over 10 in this one.
Mm.
Is that word hire, and commonly students will get confused between hire and rent. We usually say hire is by the hour, or it's much shorter period of time, or a service, whereas rent is often quite a little bit longer. So you may rent a flat, or you may rent a room for a while. So this is slightly different.
Mm.
So overall, what would you say is the best way to travel around London?
Well, as I say, I'm a big fan of cycling, so I think if you feel comfortable cycling around the roads of London, and to be fair, the roads of London are okay. There's a lot of traffic, but it's not fast moving. And what's improved over the years is there are lots of cycle lanes, so spaces alongside the road, especially for
Yep.
cyclists. So I think it's relatively safe. And so I think, to be honest, it's a cheap way of seeing London and good exercise too. But if you want to move quickly, then it's got to be the tube, I guess.
I would definitely say the tube is the quickest way of traveling. I will say though that probably my preferred way is either the bus or walking,
Mm,
and that is simply because, if I'm totally honest, the tube is iconic. It is
mm,
wonderful, but you're underground, and I don't really get claustrophobic. But when you're traveling and it's going through, I used to make jokes about the tube, saying it was like London's answer to the world's worst roller coaster or something, because it feels and the
yeah,
noises it sometimes make, like this screeching kind of
yeah.
noises. It doesn't. It does make me feel a bit um, more anxious than I want to admit.
Okay.
And
And
another thing
sometimes,
about it,
informally, sometimes people say they're going down the drain because you are. It does feel like you're going
yeah.
down a drain where all the sewers are.
Well, yes. Well, I suppose, like rats like to travel underground as well. So that was makes me nervous. But I think the thing is as well. I love the tube. I absolutely adore the tube. But when I was using it every day, it does kind of. I think when it's very very busy, I
Mm,
just prefer to be. I used to walk back from central London to Greenwich, which is a long walk. But I used to love that walk because you can walk all along the Thames, and
yeah.
you can walk along the river and see everything. It's just amazing when you get to you can get to Canary Wharf and things like this, and you miss that on the tube because you're underground. You don't see anything. But it is the most efficient way of traveling around London for sure, and
Yeah.
it is a relatively is a cheaper way. So there are black cabs. That's something we have
Right.
completely forgotten to talk about.
Yes.
The black cabs, London cabbies. There are these iconic black cabs, and they have to take a test called the knowledge. They call it the knowledge, and they have to memorize every single kind of place, the street names of London, and they
Mm,
have to be able to tell you the quickest way and the easiest way to get there, but they are expensive. Taking a
yeah.
taxi can be expensive if you get stuck in traffic again.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is
Yeah.
that, and
Bit of a
e-scooters, I
luxury, I
imagine.
think. Bit of a
Yeah,
luxury taking a black cab. Of course, things like Uber are available as well in London. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I'm going to side there and say the cabbies. There's so much. It's an iconic part. I think if you are a tourist there and you want to kind of travel in London, then a black cab is a great way to kind of take a photo with a black cab. I don't
Yes,
know.
and have a bit of banter, have a bit of a chat with the cabbie as
Yeah,
well.
they love a chat. That's one thing as well. Oh, where are you from? Oh, they kind of have a chat and things like this. But they have to take and not everybody passes this test. It is a difficult test because they're memorizing every road in London, and it's yeah. I mean, that must be an intense amount of studying that you need to do. It's called the knowledge.
Yeah.
But yeah, personally, the tube is probably the most efficient way. But going around on the bus, I think, is the best way to see things and
Mm.
also get somewhere or just walk.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So we learned
Yeah.
quite a lot of vocabulary, things like top up your oyster, tap in, tap out, give up your seat, mind the gap, the door, hire versus rent. We talked about double-decker buses. We talked about fares and fare zones, travel cards, which is called the Oyster Card. We'll talk about that in a second, just very quickly. Peak and off-peak travel, rush hour, carriage, packed, rammed, so many other words. Strike was in there as well. But thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope you enjoyed it, because I enjoyed chatting with you, Rob, very much so. I hope you enjoyed listening at home. Please do give us suggestions of other lessons that you would like to learn and vocabulary you'd like to learn about. But from me today, I just want to say thank you, Rob, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Roy. It's been fun. See you next time.
See you next time. Bye.